Some mist and murk around first thing this morning, especially across England and Wales. But I'm hopeful as the day goes on, this will start to break up more readily than it has done of late. So some afternoon sunshine for parts of England and Wales. Northern Ireland having a relatively dry day, but rather cloudy. But Scotland seeing plenty of wet weather, especially for Western Scotland, with some heavy and persistent rain here. With more in the way of brightness around, certainly a milder day. Could see highs reaching 10 to 11 degrees. So we see Sunday afternoon out on a fairly quiet note across many southern parts. Some late sunshine giving away to some clear spells overnight. Northern Ireland and much of northern England relatively dry apart from the odd spot of rain, where the main bulk of the rain really is going to be across Scotland, where some cold air beginning to tap into, so we could see that rain turn increasingly to snow, especially across the higher ground. And really, if anything, as we go through the course of the night, that rain just intensifies across parts of Scotland. A very wet start to the early hours of Monday morning. Again, some snow across the higher ground. Warnings are in force right throughout Monday, and they will continue into New Year's Eve as well. So if you do have any travel plans across Scotland, do be aware and stay alert to the latest warnings. Further south, a relatively quiet start to Monday. Some sunshine around, especially across the far south, but again, a fair bit of cloud around. Maybe just the odd shower across the far south, but again, most of the rain will be across Scotland and Northern Ireland later on, with potentially some rain just also arriving into northern England. Mild for most of us, with the exception of the far north, where it will start to turn increasingly cold.
Expect a warm front, moving from the kitchen right through to the rest of the house. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akweer, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Headliners. Tomorrow's papers tonight, every night from 11 p.m.
This is Miss Universe fans hailing the end of wokeness and crediting the Trump effect after a biological woman, there's still some of them around apparently, has won the 2024 crown. She's Miss Denmark, because obviously the last decade, you know, it's just been a beast transgender smurfs from Papua New Guinea. They're the only people allowed to win any beauty contest, you know what I mean? You're not allowed to have any.
There's some of the trans women have won these. You definitely wouldn't say no.
No,
They look amazing.
I've seen but I've seen some of them that didn't, and some that were clearly just there out of well.
Have there been more than one trans woman? Has one miss?
Yeah.
I didn't realise this.
Yeah.
Okay,
I've got a chart at home. This one isn't trans. Victoria Thielvig, 21 of Denmark. Everything about that description says attractive.
Nazis. Okay, yes. Yeah. I have seen pictures of her. She is very attractive.
Yes.
She is.
Yes.
I don't know exactly how to put it, but she is kind of not retro or vintage or so. She's quite an old-fashioned notion of beauty, like
right.
Just absolutely ice blue eyes.
No penis.
Absolutely extraordinary. Clear skin and gorgeous blonde hair. I mean, it's absolutely kind of mid-70s, beauty.
No, apparently the sanity's returned to the beauty pageant industry, so they can get back to, sexualising 4-year-olds and promoting anorexia like they used to. So
there is that, yes.
She will earn an estimated $250,000 annual salary working full-time as Miss Universe, and will live in a luxurious New York City apartment as she carries out her duties, which involve glass coffee tables and rich Saudi businessmen.
Glass coffee tables. And visiting other planets and solar systems and constellations, I would imagine, in Miss Universe.
Being concerned about animals.
Yes, absolutely, and wanting to bring about world peace. I miss those days.
GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to the Camilla Tominey Show with me, Christopher Hope. Now, we've got a brilliant show lined up for you this morning. Reform UK's candidate to be mayor in Lincolnshire, Dame Andrea Jenkins, tells all as Kemi Badenoch's feud with Nigel Farage has taken an ugly turn, with the Tory leader now calling for GBNews, that's right, us, to reduce Nigel Farage's airtime. Former Secretary of State for Defence Liam Fox is joining us in the studio to review what's been another turbulent year for war in Ukraine with Russia and the Middle East. With the West ever more involved and President-elect Donald Trump's promises for peace, we'll look at what the UK's role will be on the global stage. Labour peer Lord Foulkes, that's George Foulkes, reacts to Treasury's funding boost for thousands of state schools as private schools face a 20% cut in increase in VAT on school fees from New Year's Day on Wednesday next week. And as British businesses come together to provide prosthetics for injured children in the Gazan war, Edward Hall and Nicholas Mello from Restoring Hope will be joining me here in the studio. But before all of that, former MEP and political editor at the Daily Express, Patrick O'Flynn, joins me right now to review the Sunday morning front pages. Let's go through them very slowly. The Mail on Sunday, first of all, with Patrick, with you, with Mail on Sunday, Kemi Badenoch and this battle with GB News. What do you make of it all?
I think Kemi Badenoch and her PR team are making a catastrophic error by turning the whole of Christmas into a feud with Nigel Farage.
Yes.
And this interesting story on the front of the Mail on Sunday, which purports to reveal some of what Kemi Badenoch told the bosses of this very station and moaning on about Nigel being on and too many of her critics appearing on the channel,
yes,
has become front page worthy because of the earlier feuding that Kemi did with Nigel Farage over Reform's membership numbers. Now, I think this is completely wrong-headed way for Kemi Badenoch to deal with Nigel Farage. She is elevating him, she's giving him publicity, she's telling people who aren't altogether obsessed with politics that there's a battle on for the loyalty on the right, when they might have just thought, well, the Tories dominate the right, don't they? So I would think it's much more advisable if Kemi tries to reach an informal accommodation with Nigel Farage, in which she then advertises that she shares many of his concerns, which means she's still in the market to win back his voters, rather than condemning him and telling his voters that she doesn't therefore care about the issues. And they should do between them what the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, and Ed Davey did in the run-up to the last election, which was effectively Labour and the Lib Dems had an undeclared informal pact, harnessing the anti-government sentiment,
yes,
and organically in each constituency, voters worked out who was best placed to remove the Tory. And both Labour and the Lib Dems did amazingly well in terms of seats. And if I was advising Kemi Badenoch,
yes,
I would say that's what you've got to look at. You are not going to crush Reform. You know, the Tories aren't trusted enough to get Reform down to 4 or 5%. In my view,
to work with them a bit better.
Well, certainly don't turn it into a personality clash or a feud. If you can't reach some kind of workable accommodation with Farage, and it doesn't have to be a pact with a handshake, then more and more Tory MPs will start to wonder whether you are the person to lead them into the next election.
It goes back to the fact that Tories revealed how many members they had at that leadership election result, around 131,000
yes,
or so, and that became a target immediately for Reform to get to that number and proclaim themselves as the voice of the right.
Yes.
And yet this party is the 8th biggest party
in Parliament.
In Parliament, and the Tories are the 2nd biggest. So why is she worrying about a party which has 5 MPs and she has 121 MPs?
Well, all of those perfectly valid points. And, you know, what exactly does membership of Reform mean? It seems to be, at the moment, paying a cut price tenner online. You know, where are the real branches? Where are the real activists? I mean, Kemi, to use a horrible phrase, take a chill pill about that stuff. You know, you're supposed to be leader of the opposition. By far the biggest target should be Labour and Keir Starmer. Try not to talk about reform and Nigel Farage. But if you do, I would suggest be friendly, say you agree with a lot of their points, but they're not equipped to actually come up with a programme for change for this country, and you are. She says she's an engineer. She can do the policy detail. That's how she'll gain her upper hand against Nigel Farage. If she fights him on these day-to-day stories, he's an absolute master of that. He will win hands down, as he has been winning.
Because you're a former Brexit Party MEP, a former UKIP...
A former UKIP MEP.
MEP.
And for a short time, I was Director of Communications for Nigel.
You know how Farage works. I mean, it was all a bit of a trap, wasn't it? I mean, she's taken the bait.
It was a clever stunt to get the ticker, and they would overtake the Tories. It would have got a certain amount of coverage, but the fact that she took the bait so virulently and has then produced this other unhelpful front-page story.
Now, GB News has a statement in which they have said that the meeting was very constructive and it took place without acrimony. So they, as far as the company is concerned, it was a constructive meeting. And an ally of Ms Badenoch has told the Mail on Sunday that Kemi Badenoch had a good meeting with GB News, which was mostly about her doing more with the channel. She did ask about the status of some programmes funded by politicians and where GB News stood with the regulator. And Kemi wants to ensure that any media project she does meets the highest standards of propriety. The meeting was very friendly, and as leader of the opposition, she will continue to have such chats and discussions with the media. So they're trying to sort of cool this one down this morning.
Well, quite right. But also, it is actually a feather in the cap of GB News that it's become such an important outlet for politicians and will be going ahead. You know, no one can afford to ignore GB News these days.
Well, yes, quite. Now, listen, that kind of front page is something which Sir Keir Starmer, the PM, might welcome because it takes away the focus on his problems with Labour.
So this week we've got the private school VAT charges coming in, which is well covered again. The private school associations are a very clever, well-organised lobby group. I'm looking at the Sunday Express coverage of it, with Rachel Reeves saying that the extra VAT, I think she says 1.7 billion, will be used to improve state schools. Well, I'm not sure about that. It smacks to me like her back-of-the-envelope sums on the winter fuel, where she's not taking into account the stampede of pensioners now claiming the pension credit and therefore wiping out any savings. Now, on VAT on private schools, if that leads to pupils flowing out of private schools, that lowers the VAT revenue raised. And if they then enrol in state schools, that increases the spending that is needed and lowers the per pupil money available in state schools. So to me, this does come across as a spiteful class war-type attack.
But they say the money will help improve standards at Labour do. And, of course, do you not think maybe that the private schools have lost their political support as fees have gone up?
I think the private schools have over the last 20 years, they seem to have gone for, world-class theatres, very, very bells and whistles, and therefore fees have escalated very quickly. And the old, solid middle-class element of homegrown kids is withered a bit, and the very rich children of people from overseas are an expanding part of their market, and that does mean they're more vulnerable to attacks like this.
And in the Telegraph, there's a reminder, isn't there, of the issue of small boats, Patrick?
The Telegraph has got just a little story at the bottom. I think it's page 4 or 5, about more than 300 people coming in on small boats on Friday. It's just sort of dropped online that just over 300 again came in yesterday. This is supposed to be the off-season, the winter, but we're by my reckoning, Labour, in its half of the year that it's been in charge, is heading for 23,000 arrivals, which pro rata is right back up to the record year of 2022. So Keir Starmer isn't smashing the gangs. It looks to me like the gangs are smashing Keir Starmer.
And the result of all that, of course, is difficult polling news in today's papers.
Yeah, well, there's polls from the company, the pollster Mooring Common. If I was their PR chief, I'd be thinking I'd had a very good day, because they've got one of these mega MRP polls brought very widely in the Sunday Times, which really says we're heading for five-party politics. Labour's on course to lose almost 200 seats. Reform will surge to more than 70 seats. The Tories will get back to about 220, nearly level pegging with Labour. The SNP are looking at signs that they're going to recover too. The Liberals will kind of lose a bit, but this could be five-party politics in the next House of Commons. But the same company, Mooring Common, has got also a great array of poll coverage in the Sunday Telegraph, a different poll, but just tracking the optimism or pessimism of the British public. And by a margin of more than 2 to 1, people think next year is going to be worse than this year. There's an overwhelming feeling of the country being in the wrong direction, and people haven't seen anything from the government to suggest they're the ones to change this. So that, again, good context for Nigel Farage.
Yes, well, we had the medicine, which, of course, has been the tax-raising budget. I mean, and I guess the Tories' problem is they can't really say they have 14 years to improve it and nothing happens. That's why it's
right.
Perfect sort of ground, isn't it, for someone like a populist party like Farage to step up.
Absolutely, yeah.
And there's just finally in the Mail on Sunday, there's some, let's have a chat about Homer, shall we?
Yes. So the story is that the University of Essex has attached so-called trigger warnings for students reading the Homeric epics, the Odyssey and the Iliad.
Yes.
And there's warnings that there's sort of sexual misconduct
it's all there,
and
isn't it?
violence. But, I'm trying to remember from my brief exposure to classical mythology what exactly those two works contain. But we all know classics have, people's eyes being pecked out, all kinds of gruesome deaths, all kinds of intra-family sexual misconduct. I think that just goes with the territory. But they are the foundation, as Boris Johnson, the great classicist Boris Johnson, comments in the Mail on Sunday, that, undergraduate students are well able to cope with this, and this is the foundation of much of Western literature. So having a trigger warning, a bit silly, snowflake
particularly at universities, really. I mean, where you're meant to hear about different alternative views and challenging topics, he calls it bonkers. The Prime Minister, former Prime Minister does.
Yeah, and I think nearly everyone would surely agree with that. And I really hope that we're coming to the end of this crazy wokery, that it's reached its high point, and things like trigger warnings for university students need to be thrown out the window, probably along with things like non-crime hate incidents. And, maybe Kemi, maybe Nigel will bring us that one day. I don't suppose Keir Starmer.
Or Labour might step up, let's see.
Well, that would be great to see. I'm not holding my breath on that one.
Well, listen, great to see you here, Patrick, on the show, and happy New Year to you.
A pleasure, and to you.
Thank you. Still to come, I'm joined by Labour peer and former Minister of State for Scotland, Lord Fuchs. But first, if you're in search for some winter sun, here is a forecast for some of the top European holiday destinations.
I hope it doesn't rain.
Don't worry about it.
It'll spoil our holiday.
Relax, we're totally covered.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GBNews Travel Destinations Forecast.
There's a lot of fine weather to come across many of the usual holiday hotspots in southern Europe through the next few days. A different story across the southeast of Europe, though. Here's Storm Elena bringing some heavy rain, strong winds across parts of Greece into Cyprus and into Turkey as well. Elsewhere, though, like I said, lots of dry weather on offer, and with that, lots of sunshine too. So not looking too bad at all if you're heading across many parts of southern Europe through the next couple of days. Bye-bye.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GBNews Travel Destinations Forecast.
Still lots more to come on the show. I'll be joined by Labour peer Lord Fuchs in just a moment. This is the Camilla Tominey Show with me, Christopher Hope, on GB News.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect And then you throw me into the mix, and trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Britain's newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
A Tesco store on a Scottish island has defied locals by ignoring pleas to stay closed on Sundays.
Tesco's has said that no member of staff in Stornoway would be forced to work on a Sunday and that it had received a significant amount of positive reaction to its plans.
Well, let's talk now to the Minister of the Reformed Presbyterian Church, Reverend Kenneth Stewart. Good morning to you, Reverend Stewart. You're trying to keep Sunday special, and if Tesco are going to open up, that means it won't be quite as special for you.
Well, yes, good morning, and thanks for having me on. Yes, Tesco, for some reason, they claim it's not economic advantage, but for some reason they've decided to go against hundreds of years of tradition on this island and the deeply held religious convictions of many, many people, including, of course, their own customers who are really grieved by this decision. We come obviously from the standpoint that a day of rest is effectively mandatory. It's a human right, along with the other 10 commandments which have undergirded our moral and legal fabric in society. It actually enshrines the human right to a day of rest. And of course, in the UK, that's been eroded for many, many years. Incidentally, it's still far more respected on the continent. But for us here, the Sabbath or the day of rest has been very, very important. It's not just what we do, it's who we are. And for some reason, Tesco have decided just to go against that.
And Reverend Stewart, we were actually talking about this earlier, how in European countries, I mean, even in France, which is a secular country, still very few shops will open on a Sunday.
GB News, the People's Channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now, Chancellor Rachel Reeves said state schools will receive a funding boost of £1.7 billion a year by 2029-2030, thanks to the private school VAT exemption being removed. That means that VAT of 20% applies on private school fees from Wednesday next week. And here's what the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, had to say on this.
I recognise that a lot of parents work hard to be able to send their children to private schools, but all parents are aspirational for their children, including the 94% of children who are in our state schools. And so by getting rid of the tax exemptions that exist before for private schools, we're able to invest £1.7 billion of money into our state schools so that they can recruit and retain the very best teachers so that all children can get a great start in life.
I'm joined now by Labour peer and former Minister of State for Scotland, Lord Foulkes. George Foulkes. Welcome to the show, George. Great to see you.
Good morning, Christopher. It's great to be on your show, particularly as a Labour member after you've had a right-winger reading from the right-wing newspapers.
Well, no, he's a political commentator, not a right-winger, George, of course, but
well,
you're a politician, he isn't.
That's a matter of judgment. I think he used to be a UKIP MEP, didn't he?
Yes, and before that he was a journalist too. But moving on to this issue of VAT on private schools, is it the politics of jealousy and of taking away this exemption for private schools, and will this money be spent improving standards in state schools?
Certainly not the policy of jealousy. It's righting a wrong. Up until now, private schools are the only commercial enterprise who have had exemption from VAT. And they're a private enterprise, just like any other. And it's about time. In fact, it's long overdue for removing that particular advantage that they've had.
It's a concern, though, for families who may, particularly those on lower incomes, who save a lot to try and put their children through private school. There's obviously schools where disabled children are supported by councils. They're now threatened. Some schools are saying they're closing. Is this really what Labour want to do? Will it not put more burden on the state sector?
Well, private schools have got a huge amount of reserves. If you just take the cabinet, the shadow cabinet rather, and the schools that they went to, they've got £500 million in reserves. Look at the land and the reserves that Eton has. Look up here in Fettes at the land and reserves that Fettes has. These are the kind of reserves that could be used to help the kind of people that you're talking, the kind of children you're talking about. But meantime, the money raised by putting VAT on private school fees will be used for improving the education, as Rachel Reeves said, for 94% of the children who go to ordinary state schools, whose parents are just as concerned. You may have seen recently that music and languages are being cut from these schools. We'll be able to reinstate them in some of the schools, I hope in all of them, with the kind of money that we're getting.
We need more money, of course, for our public services. We saw that being raised, didn't we, in that budget in October. Have you seen the polling today, George Fuchs? More in Common are saying Labour would win 228 seats, the Tories 222 seats, and Reform 72 seats at the next election. Lib Dems on 58, SNP 37, Greens on 2. It's not going very well, is it, for Sir Keir Starmer?
Well, there isn't going to be an election for at least 4 years, and Keir Starmer said right at the start that we're going to have the difficult decisions to make. Because look what we inherited. We inherited, I think you may have heard this figure before, £22 billion of black hole. A lot of things that were announced that were never costed. And Labour has already started to do things. I mean, we've done a great deal in terms of the infected blood scandal. The Tories did nothing about that, and Labour has compensated. Money for the ex-miners, that's been brought in. Money for hospices has been brought in. So once this gets through to people, unfortunately, the media are mostly right-wing, and I sometimes watch GB News, and it's just a constant right-wing propaganda medium. You've got, I mean, Frost, Farage rather, not Frost. Farage is one of your reporters, one of your presenters. That's why an indication. You're really a sort of voice for the Reform Party in many ways.
Well, we're not. I mean, you've moved the subject away from Labour's problems in the polls to attacking GB News, which is a bit surprising, Lord Fuchs. I'm trying to get you to talk about what Labour's problems are. And you've listed a list there of spending proposals that they've announced.
We've done. No, they're not proposals.
I'm sure all of them are important, but the economy is flatlining. It's not growing. Spending money is easy in government. It's much harder to make savings or raise money through taxation. And you've ignored that completely.
No, not at all. Things will improve as we go through 2025. I'd put money on you, Christopher. We can come back at the same time next year that we'll be back up in the polls again, just as we deal with some of the problems that we've inherited from the Tories. And once people realise that we're doing that, then I will see we go right up in the polls.
But do you worry, though, that let's take national insurance on employers, 2% increase there means fewer people will be hired by companies, according to polling. Do you worry, though, that'll be a dead weight on the economy when we need to have this economy growing?
No, I don't think so. I think the economy will grow. And the Prime Minister has already written to the agencies, to Ofcom, to all the other regulatory agencies, asking them to come up with ideas. Even you, Christopher, could come up with some good ideas. I think seriously, it's about time. It's very easy, you know. It's one of the easiest things in the world to sit in a TV studio and criticise. One of the more difficult things is to actually do something. And Keir Starmer and his government have taken a grip of the terrible inheritance we've had and are doing something. Why don't you come in sometime? Come into the House of Lords and I'll talk to you about it. The kind of things that you can suggest to my colleagues who are ministers. We would welcome your wisdom.
Well, how about cutting the benefits bill, which is going to go to tens of billions of pounds by the end of the decade? That wasn't mentioned at all, was it? In anything in which Keir Starmer said, barely mentioned at all.
It was mentioned. We're concerned about people. We're concerned about people who are who ought to be paying taxes, who aren't paying taxes, who are using overseas tax havens to hide their money, and we want to get that. We're concerned about the money that was wasted by people who took advantage during COVID of all the protective gear that was needed and made billions. And we're going to look into that. And we're also going to follow up what you said, that people who are not entitled to benefits. Now, people who are entitled to them must get them, and they must be generous and good. But people who are not entitled to them should be found out. And we're going to deal with that. We've said that. Our Secretary of State for Work and Pensions has made that absolutely clear.
And what makes you think things are going to get better? Because currently it looks like things are going to get worse.
Well, no, it doesn't. I mean, actually, that poll that you've just quoted is better than one that was out just 2 weeks ago. So even in the last 2 weeks, we've improved. That poll showed that we were just 2% ahead, I think, of the Tories and 3% ahead of Reform. Whereas today's poll, that multi-poll that you mentioned, gives us a big lead, a relatively big lead. Not as big as we had in the general election, but still bigger than we had in the poll.
And just finally, George Fuchs, your comments on the battle over between Kemi Badenoch and Nigel Farage, is that a fight which Labour wants to see happen? It splits the right, doesn't it?
Yes, it's not unhelpful. I would agree with that. I think it's unfortunate that Kemi Badenoch has picked up that fight. But I think it is interesting. I would like to see the details of all these new members that Farage claims. I think a lot of them are overseas. I think a lot of them are underage. I think a lot of them are made up. I think some dogs have actually joined.
We're bringing it for the news now. It's great to see you, and I'll see you for that luncheon in the House of Lords very soon. Thank you for coming on.
I look forward to it, Christopher. Yeah.
George Fuchs, thank you. Still to come, lots more on the show. And as the feud between Nigel Farage and Kemi Badenoch intensifies, I'm joined by reformer UK mayoral candidate for Lincolnshire, Dame Andrea Jenkins. Stay tuned.
There's still plenty of time to grab your chance to win our biggest cash prize ever, an incredible £50,000. What would you spend £50,000 on in the coming year? Spectacular holidays, a brand new car, home improvements, or maybe you'd just like to save it for a special occasion? For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
My next guest's book will certainly provoke you. Lord Saatchi's book, Orgasm, probes 21 such ideas, chapter by chapter, in a stimulating reading experience, covering subjects from geopolitics and etiquette to the economy and the afterlife. Maurice Saatchi argues that rigorous thinking can create a blissful mental experience.
Well, the title is Orgasm, and I try to investigate the question of whether it's possible for there to be an orgasm of the mind which is equal in bliss to a physical orgasm. That's very interesting. And theoretically, the way that arises, I'll finish. Theoretically, the way that arises is by addressing conflicting ideas and then for there to be a revelation of true wisdom. That's the purpose of the book. And I think you can sum up British politics completely in 2 sentences. You'll understand very well, Michael. Conservatives are efficient but cruel. Labour is caring but incompetent. So you can see there that if you have a situation in which the Conservative Party turns out to be, in people's opinion, inefficient and cruel, well, then you're likely to have a very bad election result, which is exactly what we just did. And why?
So you have quite a lot to say to Kemi Badenoch. I mean, the first thing you would say to her would be, read my book, please, I suppose.
Well, that's absolutely the first thing. It's a perfect Christmas present for her to give, as I was saying. So that's number one. So after she's done that, well, then her level of wisdom, which I'm sure is already very high, will be greatly increased, and she'll be able to address the complex, provocative, controversial issues aired in this book.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Good morning, Happy New Year. Welcome to the Camilla Tominey Show with me, Christopher Hope. Coming up, the former UK's candidate to be mayor in Lincolnshire, Dame Andrea Jenkins, tells all as Kemi Badenoch tells GB News bosses to cut Nigel Farage's airtime on this channel. Multi-award-winning political cartoonist Christian Adams gives an overview of his favourite moments from this year, this political year just gone. And British companies come together to provide prosthetics for injured children in the Gazan war. Edward Hall and Nicola Meller from Restoring Hope will be joining me here in the studio. But first, here are your news headlines with Sophia Wensler.
Chris, thank you. Good morning. These are your headlines from the GB Newsroom. We start with some breaking news. At least 176 people are dead after a passenger jet carrying 181 passengers crashed in South Korea. 2 crew members have been rescued, but all others are missing people and now presumed to have been killed, according to firefighting authorities. Rescuers are attempting to pull people from the wreckage of the plane after it veered off the runway at Muan International Airport and crashed into a wall, bursting into flames. Local media is reporting the Boeing 737-800 jet was making a second attempt at a crash landing after its landing gear failed to open. The fire service says it believes a collision with birds and poor weather may be to blame. And some breaking news, at least 3 migrants have died and dozens were rescued after their small boat capsized just off the coast of northern France this morning. The incident is reported to have happened near Sangatte early this morning. Rescuers are positioned opposite the Fort Lapin campsite in the coastal commune, with the operation still underway. The death toll could rise. Authorities say it comes after news yesterday that 1,300 migrants have now crossed the English Channel since Christmas Day. The Prime Minister has promised to smash the gangs behind the crossings, but more than 22,000 people have arrived since he took office, up 25% on last year. Now, the Prime Minister's approval ratings have been branded catastrophic, with rural voters in a new poll following the planned tax raid on farmers. New polling by The Telegraph suggests just 1 in 5 believe Labour cares about people who live or work in the countryside. It's understood Sir Keir Starmer has been warned his ratings have suffered a catastrophic fall among countryside voters angered by his family farm tax. Meanwhile, the Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, has claimed middle classes will support VAT on private schools as pushy parents will demand more from the state sector after being priced out by rising fees. It comes as Chancellor Rachel Reeves says state schools will receive a funding boost of £1.7 billion a year by 2029, thanks to the private school VAT exemption being removed.
I recognise that a lot of parents work hard to be able to send their children to private schools, but all parents are aspirational for their children, including the 94% of children who are in our state schools. And so by getting rid of the tax exemptions that exist before for private schools, we're able to invest £1.7 billion of money into our state schools so that they can recruit and retain the very best teachers so that all children can get a great start in life.
In other news, the UK has rejected Vladimir Putin's apology over the deadly Azerbaijan Airlines crash and called for an independent investigation. The Russian president apologised to his Azerbaijani counterpart for what he called a tragic incident, but he failed to take responsibility for the aircraft crashing after it had come under fire from Russian air defence missiles. The UK's Foreign Office has called for a full and independent investigation into the crash, adding that Mr. Putin's apology fails to recognise that the reckless and irresponsible actions of the Russian state pose an acute and direct threat to the interests and national security of other states. And Elon Musk has endorsed the right-wing Alternative for Deutschland party in a guest opinion piece for the Welt am Sonntag newspaper, prompting its opinion editor to resign in protest. In the article, the tech billionaire explained why he had posted on the social media platform X last week that only the AfD can save Germany. He wrote, "The portrayal of the AfD as right-wing extremists is clearly false, considering that Alice Weidel, the party's leader, has a same-sex partner from Sri Lanka. Does that sound like Hitler to you?" he said. Shortly after the piece was published, the editor of the opinion section, Eva Marie Kogel, wrote on X that she had submitted her resignation with a link to the commentary. Those are the latest GB News headlines. More in an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
And we're back now. Russian President Vladimir Putin has told Azerbaijan he's sorry after 38 people were killed in a plane crash in Kazakhstan. It comes as the war in Ukraine intensified this year with the deployment of North Korean troops, and fighting in the Middle East has also escalated in Gaza and Syria with the fall of Assad. Now, to reflect on the year in defence and look into what could be a difficult year for world peace is former Secretary of State for Defence, Sir Liam Fox. He joins me now. Sir Liam, welcome to GB News.
Morning.
What do you make of this apology, or is it not an apology, from Vladimir Putin over the crash in Azerbaijan?
Well, when is sorry not sorry? He said he was sorry it happened in Russian airspace, but there was no indication of where culpability for this lay. And this is an occasion where I don't think this is about blaming Russia. It's a question of safety. How safe is it for civilian airliners to fly into Russia if it can't differentiate between a Ukrainian drone and a passenger aircraft?
Exactly right. I mean, it's very rare you hear that kind of contrition from Vladimir Putin.
Well, if he wanted to say sorry, he should be saying sorry for starting a war in Ukraine, in which, tens of thousands of people, civilians as well as military, have died for no reason other than Putin's vanity.
Where do you see that ending? We have Donald Trump becoming the president in 3 weeks' time. He says he'll end the war on day one. We'll wait and see if that happens. What would peace look like? I mean, freezing the gains right now hands victory to Putin, right?
Well, you have to go back to, how did we get into this position, which is, I think, a failure of deterrence. When Putin went in...
By your government in 2014, over Crimea.
When Putin went into Georgia in 2008, before we came to government, not very much, if anything, was done. When Putin went into Crimea, as you say, in 2014, nothing was really done. Putin saw this as a sign that the West wouldn't react if he went into Ukraine. I mean, there is the question of not looking at UK politics, because there's a danger of being UK-centric in this. All three of those, 2008, 2014, 2022, were all Democratic presidencies in the United States. Is this a coincidence? I doubt it very much. And we now wait to see how Putin will react. This is, of course, draining Russia of resources enormously. It's putting huge strain on their economy.
And money as well.
Manpower, directly, money, but also their economy, which has had to re-gear itself to a war economy, meaning it produces less of what it would need to become competitive in a global context. So Russia is really a problem and will need to be dealt with very clear signals that NATO is united, that NATO is willing to spend what it needs to spend on the right things, and that it will not tolerate Russian aggression nor reward it.
We'll come to spending in a minute, but just back on that point of what does peace look like, both sides are talking about some form of peace, at least suggesting they want to go towards that front. What could you do to allow Ukraine not to lose face, to feel they've lost if the line is drawn and and those territorial gains are given really to Russia?
Well, it's difficult to see a scenario, I think, where Ukraine takes back all the territory it's lost, but therefore the price for Putin has to be a security guarantee for Ukraine that any further Russian incursion into Ukraine would be met with a much sterner response than was found this time. That takes us back to the situation, of course.
Yes.
Of how do you do that? And does the West have the moral strength that it had in the Cold War to actually face up to an adversary that has a very different view of the world?
Let's look at that in two ways, the UK and also NATO. But the UK first. John Healey has been pretty firm on this, as has Keir Starmer, standing with Ukraine against Russia. But the problem they've got is getting to 2.5% of GDP spent on defence. We have no timescale for that. We may get one in the coming year.
Well, we've got, I'm afraid, a bit of a nonsense. You've got Lord Robertson carrying out the defence review, which I think will be very thorough, knowing George Robertson, but it's being done in a vacuum because there's no spending review from the Treasury. So they don't know exactly what they will have to play with. I know that because I've been there in the same situation back in 2010.
Yeah.
And all you can do then...
What have you learned from that? I remember planes being cut up on the tarmac in full view of the cameras. It looked awful, frankly, on a PR basis.
Well, that was done for a specific reason, that this was a failed project.
Nimrod, was it?
It was Nimrod 2000. This was 2010. Okay. It had had one flight, and that one flight had been actually grounded for pilot safety. And it was a piece of nonsense to continue spending. So you have to be actually very firm with the programmes that you have to manage a defence budget, and that's what we inherited in 2010, was a dire situation. But nonetheless, you've also got to be willing to spend what you need to spend. Defence is not discretionary spending like, you know, our welfare bill or education or so on. We have to spend what we need to spend, given the state of the world, to keep our country and our people safe. And I don't think that we're doing that at the present time. The situation in terms of security has deteriorated hugely. In the past decade or so. We've not met that. So not only do they need to put that defence figure up quite considerably, maybe above 2.5%. The Americans are talking about 3.5% for European NATO countries as a percentage of GDP. But how quickly can it be done, and how will it fit into the rest of spending? Given the government's competence on numbers so far, I've got absolutely no confidence in their economic ability. But the bigger question, I think, is what does NATO look like? And are European NATO countries willing to spend on their own security? Or are they always going to expect American taxpayers to pick up the bill?
That's exactly what Trump might be saying after January the 20th.
And he's not the first. I remember sitting around the NATO table with Robert Gates, who was the American Defence Secretary, saying at that point that there was the risk, if Europe constantly underspends, that an American president or a Congress would emerge that simply said, pay for your own expenditure on defence, don't expect Americans to pick up the tab. And you know, if Europe doesn't understand that now, it's never going to understand it. Many more countries do, and having Mark Rutte as the Sec Gen for NATO, I think, gives us a strong figurehead there.
We'll wait and see how the German elections also, how they land. That could be quite interesting on defence spending. Just back to the UK, we're looking at headlines here. The Mail on Sunday, Kemi's furious TV chiefs, that's GB News, favouring Nigel Farage. He has a show. You went toe-to-toe with Farage when you were in the Cabinet Minister for the Tories and a senior Tory politician for 3 decades. How would you take on the threat of Farage? Would you have this kind of go toe-to-toe with him on membership numbers and the like?
Politics is not about where you are in the polls or membership numbers or anything else. It comes to the big issues. How would you handle Ukraine? How would you handle Iran? What are you doing in a very dangerous world to ensure that we protect ourselves and maintain the quality of our public services? This is froth, and it's Christmas froth. Perhaps can be forgiven for that. You don't go about politics or marketing in any sort by talking about the brands of your opponents. Mrs. Thatcher used to say that we avoid external coalitions in this country by maintaining internal coalitions. Kemi Badenoch's got to build that traditional Conservative coalition that Mrs. Thatcher built that covers the whole country and all social groups in the country. That means setting out a programme that is relevant. We'll not be refighting the 2024 election, which everyone seems to still be doing. We'll be fighting an election in 28 or 29 after 4 or 5 years of a failed socialist government, when people recognise again the price of socialism.
Is there a vacuum, do you think? You ran for leadership, I think, twice, I think, in the Tories when you were MP.
Yeah, I was robbed.
But is there a vacuum here? We haven't heard really any firm commitments here from Camilla Badenoch. She will reverse the VAT increase on private schools next Wednesday, but otherwise there's not much from her. And I wonder if into that vacuum Farage is making hay.
Well, I think it's very clear the Conservatives are improving position once again. The polls are telling us that.
Yeah.
Labour are losing votes. Farage seems to be picking up a number of those. None of these are uncommon pictures early on in a parliament, you know, and I think that people just need they just need to take a deep breath before we get to New Year, and we need to know, if not specific policies, we need to know the general direction. My advice to Kemi is to get a copy of Mrs Thatcher's 1979 manifesto, very clear on the direction for Britain, the sort of Britain we wanted to see, not detailed on policy, and it was the prelude to 4 consecutive general election majority wins.
I should say a GB spokesman has said the meeting that took place between GB News bosses and Camilla Badenoch took place without any acrimony and was very constructive. But just finally on Labour, Liam Fox, what do they need to do to get the economy growing? You're going to say cut taxes, and I'm sure you are as a Thatcherite Tory. But what do they need to do to try and get the economy going? The election won't be for 4.5 years or so.
You cannot create wealth and economy in an economy by attacking the wealth creators. If you start to put up tax on employers, you're attacking the creation of wealth. If you start putting up taxes on things like what people inherit, then you're attacking the wealth itself. Attacking wealth creators, attacking wealth itself is not the way to improve the wealth of your economy. And ultimately, as we found out with every Labour government since the war, the consequences tend to be higher unemployment. No Labour government has ever left office with lower unemployment than it started with. We're in danger of creating inflation all over again, and we've got the politics of spite and envy at the centre of government. Well, that's if you exclude incompetence.
Okay. Well, Liam Fox, former Defence Secretary and former Tory MP, thank you for joining us again on GB News.
It's a pleasure
to see you. Thank you. Now, coming up with the fighting between Camilla Badenoch and Nigel Farage intensifying, I'm joined by Reform UK's mayoral candidate in Lincolnshire, Dame Andrea Jenkins. This is the Camilla Tominey Show with me, Christopher Hope, on GB News.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Following the summer riots and the resurgence of far-right ideologies, the former Education Secretary told peers that reinforcing shared values is now more crucial than ever.
So we're asking this morning, should we teach British values or would it be a step backward?
Or how do you even start? To debate this now, we're joined by the Campaign for Real Education chairman, Chris McGovern, and political commentator Matthew Stadlen.
Well, I think these days, particularly in schools, it's quite fashionable to look at the negative sides of Britain's identity, particularly British history. Personally, I think I'm very proud of being British, and I think we need to be proud of our country like most other countries around the world are.
As Chris says, Matthew, lots of other countries do it. Heck, you only have to look at the United States, don't you, to see how sort of patriotic they are. Is there anything wrong in trying to instil a bit of that amongst our youth?
I'm just worried it sounds a little bit communist, Stephen, being told what it is to be British. I've got my own personal but very vague views of what British values might be: inclusivity, patience, being able to queue, decency, respect for democracy and the rule of law. But I mean, very many people will have different sets of values. Some people are racist. So are British values racist? You talked about the far right. I think we all know what the far right is. It's sort of violent, xenophobic racism. But if you have, say, I don't know, 3-4 million people in this country who might describe themselves as racist or far right, and they're British, or as British as you lot and as I am, does that mean those values get taught in schools? My worry is it's a little bit communist.
GB News, the People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Okoye, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
And we're back now. Camilla Badenoch's feud with Nigel Farage has escalated over the weekend over claims that she urged bosses of this channel, GB News, to cut the airtime given to Reform UK leader Nigel Farage. That's according to the front page of the Mail on Sunday, as you can see. They claim in their reports that during the meeting with the channel's chief executive, Camilla Badenoch said that GB News should not be, quotes, a haven for my critics. I'm joined now by Reform UK's mayoral candidate for Lincolnshire, Dame Andrea Jenkins. Dame Andrea, welcome to the show. Great to see you and Happy New Year to you. What on earth do you make of this? Why is your former leader, Camilla Badenoch, engaging in a fight with Nigel Farage?
I mean, I think it was rather immature, if I'm honest. And I don't quite believe the Conservative figures. If I can just look at, my old seat of Morley, we went from 450 seats, actually, 450 members down to 100 members after what happened to Boris and Liz. So if that, Christopher, is echoed across the country, I'd be very surprised if it's anywhere near the 130,000 that,
Yeah, I should explain to... I should explain to viewers and listeners, 130,000 or so of the membership tally announced by the Tory party at the time they announced Camilla Badenoch as leader. And now Reform UK claim they've got 150,000 members, so that allows Reform to say they're a bigger party. But no, I think the Tories wouldn't be questioning that. Their figures, they would claim, I'm sure, are audited, as does Reform UK. I just wonder why this battle's taking place, because Reform UK have 5 MPs, the Tories have 121 MPs, and Reform UK is the 8th biggest party or grouping in Parliament. The Tories are the 2nd. Why on earth are the Conservatives so worried about a tiny party like Reform?
Well, they're worried because they realise that the more activists you get, the more leaflets get delivered, the more your messaging gets out there. I mean, do you see the poll today, which is the headlines, Reform, they could take 17 seats in Yorkshire, including my old seat, including Ed Miliband's. And so they're clearly worried. But to me, besides, Robert Jenrick, I think is doing a better job than Kemi, actually, of holding Labour to account. But Nigel and the 5 MPs are doing a far better job than the whole of the Conservative Party at the moment in holding Labour to account. And so I think that's probably why they're getting worried. And regarding your point you just made, previously about them writing to the channel or contacting the channel, GB News. I got it on good authority that the candidate who's standing against me for the Conservative Party has also put complaints in to not just yourself, but to other TV stations where I go on, and we're not even in the short campaign. So it does seem to be filtering down even to my campaign, Christopher.
And I should say, we are really keen to have anyone on from any parties, Labour MPs, Labour candidates, whoever.
Well, you do,
and we're
don't
constantly
you?
asking for that. I should say a GB News spokesman said the meeting took place between GB News and Camilla Badenoch without any acrimony and was very constructive. Also, while we've been on air, the Tories have sent us a statement too to read out to you. Reform has delivered, the Tories say, a Labour government that has cruelly cut winter fuel payments for 10 million pensioners, put the future family farming and food security at risk, and launched a devastating raid on jobs which will leave working people paying the price. A vote for reform this coming May is a vote for a Labour council. Only the Conservatives can stop this. So, Dame Andrea, the suggestion here from the Tories is that reform and support for reform simply help Labour stay in power.
But I think that's actually got very arrogant now. And I mean, I did even say during my election, I'm a Democrat and, smaller parties have the right to exist. And even though the party was putting that out during the election campaign, they've got every right to exist. We're a democracy and the movement's growing. And I think it actually shows that they're going about this the wrong way. Instead of attacking reform, who's actually hoovering up a lot of their members, they should be thinking, right, we want strong leadership here. We want to bring these members back. I mean, Kemi's interview on Radio 4 was a prime example of this, Christopher. Look how she said, Andrea Jenkins doesn't like me, like we're in the playground. I don't have any feeling one way or another as her as a person. I don't think she's a very good leader. That's completely different. What she should have said is, it's a shame when any Conservative, former member of parliaments or elected officials leave the party, but I will bring strong leadership and actually ensure we bring people back. But this is why reform, actually, and Nigel, Richard, all of the team, they are speaking sense. They're actually speaking to the heart of what people are thinking. They are saying the things that people want us to say.
Have you been in touch with Kemi Badenoch? I mean, she seemed to say that you don't like her. I mean, do you like Kemi Badenoch?
Well, that's what I just said. I don't have a feeling one way or another about it. I mean, as a person, she's probably okay. But as a leader, I did say I'd leave the Conservative Party if she became leader, because she wouldn't rip up the last of the EU laws on the statute, Christopher, because, it was in her remit. And I'm a passionate Democrat, and that's why I fought so hard for Brexit. And I feel that, unfortunately, Kemi's rhetoric is all hot air, but her background in what she's done in Parliament does not prove that she delivers. So it's not about her as a person, it's about her as a leader. And the only leader we've got what's strong is Nigel.
Yes, Nigel Farage, you would say that. Others would disagree with that, but of course. Yes. I mean, is reform not in the box seat because you've had 14 years of the Tories, by the end, frankly, failing on a number of measures, not least increasing the tax burden and not cutting net migration or illegal migration, and then Labour's had a bumpy start with no growth in the last quarter, and that leaves the door wide open to someone like Reform UK, which has never got near power and can offer simple solutions to complex issues. I mean, is that not where we are? Simply the party that you're now supporting is offering untested and simplistic ideas to win support.
Look, I think, don't underestimate Reform. Look what happened in Canada. They ended up becoming the bigger party, didn't they? And then I think both parties came together eventually in the end. But no, I've met with the whole team so many times. We have daily conversations, and we're going to have a powerful manifesto, which I'm going to in Lincolnshire as well. I've been even working on it the last few days, which actually speaks to the heart of the people. Yeah. I think what's happened is, party members left the Conservative Party with what they did to Boris, what they did to Liz, and then they see that they have a leader who's not really saying much, and so they're still coming to us. But I want to take the fight to Labour as well now, Christopher. We've seen these polling about Yorkshire, and we could take Lincolnshire mayoral, we could take the one around the Hull area. And so I think we need to send a message to both the major parties. Look, neither of you are safe. The British public want reform, and they want common sense politics, and that's what we will bring.
You mentioned forecast gains there for Reform. There's a polling in today's Sunday Times giving Reform UK, were an election held now and it won't be for 4 years, 72 seats. The Tories, 222 seats. Labour, 228 seats. That suggests that if Reform in the UK did form an alliance, they could run the country from 2029. You mentioned Canada. Can a deal be done here? I mean, shouldn't these two right-of-centre parties be coming together to take on Labour and the Lib Dems? And are you urging that internally in Reform UK?
No, I'm not. If you remember, Christopher, we've had conversations, haven't we, on your shows over the last 18 months. I was trying to bring both parties together before the election to take the fight to the socialists. But I think now it's actually gone too far. And what Kemi did in actually virtually accusing Nigel of fraud, I think that's actually trampled on any potential relationship. Not that there was going to be one anyway, but I think that's, rhetoric like that doesn't help matters. But I think what we've seen with his 150,000 members in that short space of time, we are a movement and still 4.5 years away from election. Yeah. We can pull from Labour and Conservatives as well. Then we can become the governing party.
On those 150,000 members, are they all in the UK? Are they all voters who can vote here, or are they all around the world? Because some of the memberships are being signed up in the small hours of the morning.
Well, I mean, look, I'm an insomniac. I was sort of writing my campaign plan at 2 a.m. in the morning this morning, Christopher. So, well, I understand the parties had the verifiers in, so you'd have to ask them that. But I couldn't see why it would not be, to be honest.
Yeah. And just finally, I guess the one party delighted with this battling it on the right of politics is Sir Keir Starmer, because the polling is bad for him. There's no growth in the economy. He's trying to get regulators to try and cut regulation to improve the economy. It was a bright spot for him, really, in a difficult set of headlines this Sunday.
Yes, and this is why I've only tweeted last night, actually, and this morning, Christopher, about taking the fight to the Labour heartlands, because they are and they should be our next target. And so I think watch this space. We will be taking some seats off Labour as well in the council elections. That's if they go ahead, unless the Conservative and Labour-led councils try to stop these elections with what's coming from central government. But I think you'll be some surprising results in there.
Well, Dame Andrea Jenkins, the mayoral candidate for Reform UK in Greater Lincolnshire, thank you for joining us today on GB News. Now, coming up, after one of the biggest international and political years we've seen for a while, we'll be looking back at how things have panned out via the world of cartoons. This is the Camilla Tominey Show with me, Christopher Hope, on GB News.
Good morning, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. Well, as we see out 2024, the weather is certainly set to change. We lose the mist and fog, but it's certainly turning much wetter and windier for most of us. Back to here and now, we still have some mist and murk around first thing this morning, especially across England and Wales. But I'm hopeful as the day goes on, this will start to break up more readily than it has done of late. So some afternoon sunshine for parts of England and Wales. Northern Ireland having a relatively dry day, but rather cloudy. But Scotland seeing plenty of wet weather, especially for Western Scotland, with some heavy and persistent rain here. We have more in the way of brightness around, certainly a milder day. You could see highs reaching 10 to 11 degrees. So we see Sunday afternoon out on a fairly quiet note across many southern parts. Some late sunshine giving away to some clear spells overnight. Northern Ireland and much of northern England relatively dry apart from the odd spot of rain, where the main bulk of the rain really is going to be across Scotland, where some cold air beginning to tap in too, so we could see that rain turn increasingly to snow, especially across the higher ground. And really, if anything, as we go through the course of the night, that rain just intensifies across parts of Scotland. A very wet start to the early hours of Monday morning. Again, some snow across the higher ground. Warnings are in force right throughout Monday, and they will continue into New Year's Eve as well. So if you do have any travel plans across Scotland, do be aware and stay alert to the latest warnings. Further south, a relatively quiet start to Monday. Some sunshine around, especially across the far south, but again, a fair bit of cloud around. Maybe just the odd shower across the far south, but again, most of the rain will be across Scotland and Northern Ireland later on, with potentially some rain just also arriving into northern England. Mild for most of us, with the exception of the far north, where it will start to turn increasingly cold.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here We do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla and Tominey Show with me, Christopher Hope. Now, the Imperial War Museum is commemorating 150 years since Sir Winston Churchill's birth with a captivating new exhibition exploring his life through political cartoons. So, after one of the more eventful years in our political history, what did 2024 look like in cartoons? We're joined now by the multi-award-winning political cartoonist, Christian Adams. Christian, great to see you.
Morning.
Happy New Year. And now you draw, of course, back with The Telegraph.
That's right.
It's been quite a year, hasn't it? Which cartoons would you pull out?
The great thing is that there was the surprise, almost snap election, really. So that was great because I thought, because summer's usually terrible for cartoonists, because, you know, the silly season, nothing is happening politically for a political cartoon. So it's great for us. I mean, it was absolutely brilliant. So that was it. That's sort of topsy-turvy. The highlight of the year was the summer. It's usually the quiet time.
And no one saw it coming. That was involving Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, calling it in a soaking wet Downing Street.
Absolutely, yes. Which couldn't have been worse. He couldn't have planned it worse if he tried.
That's right. And other big issues for you this year are the US election, of course.
Yes. I mean, Trump, whatever you think of Trump, for a political cartoonist, he is absolutely perfect. He's the gift that keeps on giving.
And we're just showing now on screen one of your ones there. It looks like Kamala Harris apparently running away with it, but Biden giving the baton of power to the man with the blonde hairdo.
Exactly, yeah.
I think you'll have fun this year. And how do you draw Trump? You draw him with an enormous tie, do you, and an extraordinary haircut? Well,
it's the extraordinary haircut. I once asked another cartoonist, right at the beginning, however many years ago it was now, I said, so I'm trying to draw his hair. How exactly do you think it goes? And he said, nobody knows. And I'm still staring at his hair, and I have no idea which way it goes or what is happening up there. So I try and draw it, but I make it up. He makes it up, so I make it up as well.
Yeah, he does draw the eye. I was in Trump Tower for a press conference and asked him a question for GB News back in September. Yeah, and he just does. You do just want to sort of look at him because you're so familiar with his behaviours on TV, but seeing him in person... Tiny feet, I thought, and big hair. That was my conclusion on seeing him in person. Of course, Trump versus Putin is one of the big international rivalries, frankly, this year, and how those two individuals take each other on, particularly over how to deal with the war in Ukraine, is one. And on that camera, we see now, don't we? We have that's a take on Wicked, isn't it, Christian, with Vladimir Putin?
That's it. The Wicked movie had just come out. Exactly. Yeah.
And he's saying he's the good one.
That was a couple of weeks ago. I'm just trying to think. I've forgotten what it was. I mean, he's bombed so many people, but it was
he's bombing somewhere, probably Ukraine.
Yeah, but it was another atrocity. But he blamed it was the West. He really did say it was the West world.
Yeah, it's not quite the wicked West, but it may well have said that. And of course, that is a justification of his special military exercise, as he describes it, in Ukraine, which, of course, is an invasion of Ukraine, frankly, and we're still dealing with the fallout of that. And how that ends, of course, we've got Trump saying he can end it with a peace deal on day one of his premiership when it starts on January the 20th. And how that looks will be something you'll be looking closely at.
It will be. I'm never quite sure whether to how seriously to take Trump, because he did say we're going to build a wall and everybody on day one last time, and he did actually. So, I'm not a politician, so I've no idea what he's going to do about Putin or Ukraine. But I'm there to draw a cartoon about it.
That's right. And of course, Sir Keir Starmer, he won the election with that landslide. Has he proved difficult to draw?
He's one of those people who's got an extremely boring face to actually draw, but you sort of get used to it. He's got a very high forehead, and very rosy cheeks, and the spectacles help. Spectacles always help everybody. That cartoon there was with the red painting. Everybody, and it was like, can you turn it blue? At the time, people thought he was going to be rather right wing, but that didn't happen, did it?
Yeah, we'll try and go back to that. I think that was your take on the painting of the monarch, King Charles, wasn't it?
That's correct.
And it was a bit red for him. Arguably, though, since the budget, that may have changed. He has gone quite socialist, you'd argue, in his...
No, absolutely, exactly. I got that wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, that was before... I mean, the problem with him was, before the election, he wouldn't say anything. So there was nothing for a cartoonist to grip onto. So the running gag was that he had no policies and wouldn't say anything. So there was nothing else to say about him. Really. There is now. Now he's in power. There's plenty to say about him now.
We displayed a selection of your other cartoons there involving Rishi Sunak. I mean, he's always quite small when you draw him. Is that what you try and draw out? You draw... There we have him in the rain. I think that must have been in 10 Downing Street.
Well, funnily enough, I drew that before the election. They said, don't have a summer election, it's madness. And I drew him being rained on in summer, and it actually happened.
Yes.
I drew that about 6 weeks before it happened.
Yes. I think your Starmer looks a bit like David Cameron. Is that unfair?
Well, no, that's fine. They both have the slightly privileged rosy cheeks.
Yes.
And they obviously enjoy a good lunch as well by the look at their chin.
I know. And what's come up this next year? Who are you sharpening your pen to draw this coming year?
Well, we've got Camilla. So obviously, she's very easy to draw. She's very featureful face.
Yes.
So it's great, and her hair's great. And of course, again, you keep thinking as a cartoonist, well, I'm never going to draw them again. Like, for example, Cameron, when he resigned, you think, I'll never draw them again. And then I thought, well, Farage is out the picture. I'll never draw him again. A couple of years ago. And now he said he might be Prime Minister in 4 years.
Do you try and find some shorthand to indicate to the reader
Definitely,
who you're drawing? So with Farage, is always the fag on his lip or something? And
the fag and the pint, and Trump is the hair. And Boris was the hair. It's great having shortcuts, I'm telling you.
And what's your shortcut for Keir Starmer?
Oh, my God. Well, he's so boring. I don't think there is even a shortcut for him. His hair, I suppose. He's got very manicured.
Are there any in-jokes in your cartoons? I know one colleague of yours on Fleet Street draws an outline, I think, of his wife, I think, in every cartoon he does.
That's Mac, who's been doing that. I wrote to him 40 years ago as a child, obsessed with cartoons, saying, who is that woman in every cartoon?
Yeah.
And he wrote back to me, and he said, thank you so much for your letter. Me and my blonde-haired wife have no idea who you're talking about.
I know, right? So I always try and look for it every single week, and I always find it somehow.
Really?
It's like but it'd be quite an interesting time for you, I think. And how long do these cartoons take for you to draw? And where do you find inspiration, Christian Adams?
It's a day's work, which is fine. I'm not down a mine. It's not the most difficult job in the world, and it takes as long as it takes. And inspiration, that's the age-old question, which I can't answer because I've no idea. But somehow it happens, and it has to happen because I've got a deadline at the end of the day.
And that drives you on. Well, readers and listeners and viewers of GB News and readers of The Telegraph will see your drawings through the year in the Daily Telegraph and Sunday Telegraph. Thanks for joining us today, Christian Adams.
Thanks, Christopher.
Lots more to come on this show. But first, if you're in search of some winter sun, and I was after swimming in the lakes over Christmas, here's the forecast for some of the top European holiday destinations.
I forecast a perfect holiday in the sun.
Weather looking good then?
For sure, and no worries about our travel insurance.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Hello there, welcome to your latest winter sun forecast. Well, as we see out 2024, it's going to remain fairly unsettled for parts of Cyprus and Greece. This area of cloud and rain continues to linger here. But for much of Italy, Spain and Portugal, a fairly quiet couple of days with some late winter sunshine here. A few showers for Madeira, maybe just creeping into Canaries. But as we approach New Year's Day itself, it should be fairly fine and dry across the Canaries.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Still to come, how British companies working together to provide prosthetics for injured children in the war in Gaza. This is the Camilla Tominey Show with me, Christopher Hope, live on GB News.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date, or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. This is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Apparently, in the Mail, page 5, hard-pressed bosses already having to deal with deadlines, red tape and staff who won't actually come into the office over Christmas. And they're saying that Christmas parties this year are going to be as lame as ever because everyone's afraid of basically getting cancelled or misbehaving or getting sacked for their behaviour. Would you risk it, Trey, at Christmas?
Do you know, I've actually never had a normal job in my life, so I wouldn't last a second because I'm not very politically correct. But it must be horrendous, really, because rather than enjoying yourself, you're having to completely always censor yourself. And it might be the most innocent of stuff that's said to someone that they then take offence to, which means you're going to probably just keep your mouth shut, which doesn't sound like the best of parties, does it, really?
No. Tricky one, isn't it? Because you're not at work, so it's not an office issue if, you know, some banter and it's taken the wrong way. But still, it's still a work environment, isn't it?
Yeah. If HR shows up, it's a work party. It's a work event.
HR shows up, I'm gone.
Yeah, well, that's what it is. And so even for us this year, first of all, it's the first year we're calling it a holiday party. I don't know how I felt about that.
Really? What, your company's doing that?
Yeah, they're calling it a holiday party.
Oh, no, well, no.
Yeah, I know. I voted against.
So they got rid of the word
Christmas.
Why?
Because we want to be inclusive.
How's it not inclusive to call it Christmas?
I know. Trust me.
Are you still going to go? I wouldn't bother going. I'd say no.
I am going to go, but I'm going to go dressed as Mrs. Claus, and it's going to be Christmassy, and I'm going to make sure that Christmas enters the door with me.
Yeah, you spread that Christian vibe.
100%. But outside of that, there is that element of HR showing up, and HR will be sober, and they've already prepped them to say, like, listen, this isn't your party. HR can have their party. This is your hangout.
Yeah.
Make sure everyone's being PC.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Jubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Now, British companies are working together to provide prosthetics for injured children in the war in Gaza. The Restoring Hope initiative employs world-first technology to provide functioning prosthetics in an unprecedented time frame, under 1.5 hours. Edward Hall and Nicholas Meller join me now from Restoring Hope. As a father of an amputee, that is very quick. Now, how on earth, Edward, do you get these legs fitted so quickly?
Well, this is new technology, new British technology, which is being deployed today, fitting legs within 1.5 hours. So people are up and walking, helping their family back into the community within a very short space of time.
That's extraordinary. And, of course, what's so important, isn't it, in war zones, is getting people mobile quickly and able to look after themselves.
That's right, not just in war zones, of course, but in everyday life. So the quicker you can get people up and about, the better.
So you've been in Gaza, you've been in Ukraine too. Tell us about that.
It was a strange story, if I could just say, in that we started off in Ukraine. My mother, when she died, had a mobile ambulance, a Berlingo, we took to Ukraine. Nicholas said we should fill it with prosthetic arms. We took arms to Ukraine. We visited 4 hospitals. We trained people to fit those arms. And then...
Were they NHS arms? Or
no, they were 2 companies. They were Koala, which was a little group that span out of Imperial College, and Nicholas was involved in that. So they span out of Imperial College, British companies fitting arms very quickly. This made a big difference to people, and I think my turning point was as we were sitting with a man, a soldier, who'd lost his arm, who was a guitar player, sitting playing Blackbird.
Yes, by Paul McCartney.
In the corner, absolutely. Just really made such an impression.
So that was back in 2020?
Back in 2023.
Yeah.
And then it was really 6 months later, I was recounting this story to King Abdullah because...
of Jordan.
Of Jordan. We had a chance to go over and meet with him, his band of brothers. And this was something he took up. Nicholas, why don't you tell us how that made such a difference?
Yeah, Nicholas Mellor. So then that took the project to Gaza.
And with the wonderful support of His Majesty and the Royal Jordanian Army that had a field hospital in Gaza and some of the best prosthetists in the world, they've got an amazing rehabilitation centre there. And Dr. Rami Faraj, the King's doctor, said, well, we need to have legs as well as arms. You know, go out and find the most innovative company is the one out there. And that we brought in a company called Amparo that makes adjustable sockets. And so we've been able to support them providing arms and legs through the Jordanian Field Hospital.
Yes, 250 amputees in Gaza are now walking again as a result of your work, and that's vital. Are you short of legs and arms? I mean, or are you asking providers to send used legs and arms to you to go to Gaza or Ukraine?
Well, the great thing now is that we've got the sort of proof of concept. The first team has been in there for 100 days, is just going to be coming out shortly. And the question now is, how can we best scale this up, share the approach with other charities, other hospitals, and that's what we're planning to do in the new year. But we need support to be able to do that. We need actually the funds to pay for the arms and the legs, and then they'll be fitted by the teams that are already there.
It's privately funded at the moment as a charity.
Yes, this was something that was done by His Majesty the King, and then I'm very proud to say that the British government stepped up, and they have part-funded this as well. So we've now got it up and running, and now we've got to find a way of actually building support so that we can really scale and sustain this initiative.
And you're involved in Gaza and Ukraine. Is that putting a stress on the charity, or can you manage that pressure okay?
The plan is to go back to Ukraine. Interestingly, Ukraine wasn't the right moment for us, and we pulled back from Ukraine. We're still doing some work there, but the environment wasn't the right one. It was really with His Majesty's vision and his support that enabled us to sort of move the project forward.
And just how have you got to know the King of Jordan? And not every charity can get his help on things.
It goes back to Sandhurst, a wonderful British military institution where we served together. We became officers together, me and a number of people. And that bond, I think, has made a big difference as one has gone forward. And it really is his vision and his legacy that we're working with. And this has been great. Obviously, for me, having been a soldier who was also injured, it makes it even more poignant. And the opportunity to work with people and give them hope has made a big difference.
And Nicholas, what drew you to helping amputees particularly?
I was originally met this team that was developing these new prosthetics at Imperial College. They asked me to be their chairman. I see there's a huge opportunity now for rethinking, reimagining how we can do it. And we really need to do this for children because actually the whole field of prosthetics is really for adults. If we can do it, children need support through their whole life.
And repeated limbs.
And repeated limbs. And we have a system in place now to do that, to really transform this with children. And we've had amazing support from engineers and designers who've been able to link with the team in the field that actually has envisaged a whole new generation of prosthetic products and services that will be needed for these children. And we've got to make that happen.
Yeah, well, how can listeners and viewers get in touch with your charity? Is there a website?
There is a website, and I think we've got it. The link, which we can.
OK, I'm sure we can tell our viewers and listeners later. Edward Hall and Nicholas Mellor from Restoring Hope, thank you for joining us on GB News. Thanks to all my guests today for joining me on the Camilla Tominey Show. We'll see you all again very soon. Have a great New Year.
Heavy showers first thing will be followed by a warm, cosy day. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. As we see at 2024, the weather is certainly turning increasingly unsettled. For some of us, it could potentially turn very windy, especially over the New Year period. Out there at the moment, we still have high pressure